Welcome to A Shock in the Dark. I'm the narrator on a road trip around the United States of America, following your stories wherever they may take me. And this week, 2 stories for the price of 1. I'll be reading 2 letters from right around Deming, Arizona. On this episode, first, it's coincidence, fate, paranormal event, you decide. Then, a school teacher learns a lesson. Let's start with letter number 1. Hello, A Shock in the Dark. I've changed the names in this story, but otherwise it's true. It's not necessarily paranormal, but you can decide what it is, because I really don't know. My name is Billy, and I live in Deming, New Mexico. If you aren't familiar, basically we're fairly close to the Arizona border, but we're closer to the Mexican border. It's about 45 minutes or so drive to Mexico. It's funny because Deming's nickname back in the 1800s was Little Chicago, because for sure, without a doubt, with the completion of the second transcontinental railroad in North America, soon it would be a giant city. Well, I think at last check we're still under 15,000 people, so nope. But I got no complaints, really. I like it here. I like the combination of Old West or Wild West flavor along with the Native American and Mexican cultures. It's a good blend, especially when it comes to food. Maybe I just like it because I grew up here, or maybe I just spend so much time outdoors. Ever since I was a kid, a tiny kid, my parents let me go out into the wilderness around our house, from the time the sun came up till the time the sun went down. That must sound crazy to some people, but I'm 40 years old now, and those were simpler times. My mom did a lot of charity work when I was a kid, and in fact, throughout her whole life. And even though we weren't particularly religious, a lot of times that charity work would be for one church or another. That work led her to becoming friends with a nun at the Catholic Church. We'll call her Sister Marie. Well, at some point, maybe when I was about 10 or 11 years old, Sister Marie had the opportunity to go to the Vatican and meet the Pope. She had so much appreciation for the work my mom had done that when she came back, she brought my mom a present. It was this small, translucent cube, and in it, a yellow flower. On the bottom was a prayer, and a St. Christopher's medal was stamped into the bottom as well. Sister Marie explained that this little present was for protection, and it had been blessed by the Pope himself. Again, we weren't Catholic, but my mom really appreciated the gesture, and she placed this little flower cube up on the mantel in the living room so it could do what it's supposed to do, protect my mom. Well, that thing ended up sitting there on the shelf above the fireplace for years. Then, in 2015, Mom was diagnosed with a terminal disease. The doctor said she didn't have long to live. A couple of weeks later, I'm visiting my mom, and I notice this little cube has a white spot embedded in it, along with the flower. Now, I know there was no white spot in there before. I had looked at this thing a million times as a kid. No how, no way was there any imperfection in this cube. Anyway, I'm back again in another couple of weeks, and I go over, I check it out, and that little white spot in the flower cube is absolutely bigger than it was. Every time I went over, this white spot is bigger, and this crystal clear cube is getting cloudy. Eventually, I started taking pictures of the thing to show that this thing's really growing. Well, the next time I go over there, my mom was barely hanging in there. I go see her, and after a while, I go out to the living room, and my brothers are there. I say hi to them, and boom! There's this tremendous crack. It's an ear-piercing smack, followed by the sound of little sprinkles around the room. I look over, and that little flower cube is gone. I looked all over that room, and there was no piece of it left any bigger than the ball of a ballpoint pen. That's when Dad walked out of the room and told all of us. Mom was gone. Right at that very instant, the moment Mom let go, that cube, that protective cube, disintegrated. Yeah, it might be a coincidence, but it's a damn freaky one if it is. I don't know what any of this means, but I'm absolutely certain it means something. And it's 100% true, just like that. Thanks for what you do, Shock. I appreciate it. Keep it up, Billy. I'm sorry for your loss, Billy, and thank you very much for that personal story. I appreciate people like you who are willing to write in and share. Our next letter, as I'm spending the night here in Deming, New Mexico, on the Shock in the Dark tour of the U.S., comes from somebody who calls himself Barbara, who lives in nearby Silver City. Dear Shock in the Dark, I'm a school teacher, so I can't really afford to have the students hear me talk about crazy stuff. I'm a teacher, so I can't really afford much at all. So since I need to make myself anonymous, it's not only for me, but for the sake of the other person in the story, I'll call myself Barbara. Like I said, I'm a teacher. I teach young kids, let's say somewhere around the age of kindergarten to second grade range. This past school year, right as the school year began, I got a few new students in my class. A couple of them were starting at my school because their parents had moved into my district, but one new student had moved with his family all the way from India. His name was Veer. Veer spoke English very well. I don't know that he was any more intelligent than any other student in my class, but whether it was his education in India or his parents, Veer was at least a couple of grades ahead of where he should be. Every week during the school year, I do this thing called Lunch with the Teacher. I draw a random name out of the fishbowl, and the student whose name I draw out gets to have lunch with me. It gives me a chance to get to know each student one-on-one. Fairly early in the year, I happened to draw Veer's name, and when lunchtime rolled around, we sat down to eat one-on-one. I had started asking him questions about India and his family and what his parents do for a living when Veer asked me a question.
Miss Barbara, am I allowed to ask you a question?
Sure.
Who's your friend?
He said between mouthfuls of prepackaged fruit salad. Well, you're my friend, Veer.
No, I mean him.
Veer pointed at an empty seat next to me. Why don't you tell me, Veer?
I don't know him.
Well, why don't you ask him his name? Veer turned to face the empty seat next to me.
Hello, mister. May I ask what is your name, sir?
Veer appeared to be listening intently and then laughed out loud. And then he just went back to eating his sandwich. Well, I said.
He's funny.
Oh yeah? What did he say?
He said his name was Jack, but I could call him Pawpaw.
I froze. I didn't know what to think. I was stunned, but I decided it was just had to be a coincidence. See, my grandfather's real name was Jack, but my brother and I always called him Pawpaw. But curiosity got the best of me, and I had to check. So, Veer, what does Jack look like?
He has black hair and a mustache.
I was relieved. My grandfather had gray hair and no mustache.
And he's an army man.
Okay, now I'm nervous again. What immediately flashed through my mind was an old picture of my grandfather that my mom always kept on her bookshelf. It was a photo from World War II. Back then, yep, his hair was black, and he did have a mustache in those days. Veer, could you ask him what he's doing here? Veer opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly stopped. He was listening. Then he continued eating his sandwich. Veer, what did he say?
You didn't hear him?
No, I didn't.
He said he was proud of you. He says you grew up to be so pretty.
Veer giggled and blushed and hid behind a sandwich. My eyes teared up, and yeah, at this point, I was all in. It could be a lucky guess, and it might seem silly reading about it, but unless you're ever put in this position, don't judge me. I turned to that empty chair and, through some tears, managed to whisper, "Thank you. I miss you so much, Pawpaw." The bell rang. Lunch was over. But that's all I could think about the next day. By next week, I'd convinced myself I was just being silly. This was just a student making up a couple of names and getting lucky accidentally. I was all too eager to believe. But a few weeks later, after that, I had started doubting that. What if it was real? What if this kid had some sort of crazy ability? Obviously, I had to find out. So when it came time to draw out a kid's name for lunch with the teacher, yeah, I cheated. No matter the name I drew, I just said Veer's name and we were back on for lunch. Once again, I sat across from Veer as he unpacked his lunch bag. "So, Veer, how do you like living in America?" I asked. But I don't even know if he answered before I quickly followed up with, "So, is our friend Jack here today again?" He looked over at the empty chair.
No,
He said.
it's a lady.
"Oh, and what is the lady's name?"
Dorothy.
Came his answer. I don't know anybody named Dorothy."
Yeah, 'cause you weren't born yet. Dorothy lived here when there was only one house. It was a farm, but it's all gone away. It's where the church is.
Veer pointed out the window in the direction of a church that's a couple of blocks away from the school.
They had an irregular farm with asparagus and celery.
Irregular? Veer listened for a moment and then said,
What does irrigation mean?
"Oh, that means they brought water from somewhere else." But Veer wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the empty chair.
No, they dug a well.
"Oh, okay." For the rest of lunch, it was practically a history lesson into turn-of-the-century New Mexico and homesteading, and I was torn because I know Veer has such a great education, and maybe it was his parents had taught him about all this stuff, this new place where they were going to go live. But then again, so much of this was information that you just don't learn about in a museum, like specific names and daily life and the name of the place where they got their turkeys and chickens, or exactly how long it took to dig a well, or how deep it had to be, or how they traded produce to someone who used divination rods to find the right spot to dig. It was all very strange and all over way too quickly. I upped the lunch with a teacher from once a week to twice a week. Shockingly, Veer would win at least once a week. Sometimes we would just sit there and eat our sandwiches. Other days I felt like I was at a table where every seat was taken, standing room only. Veer brought me history lessons in a way that really made the past come alive. He told me about future events. Nothing earth-shattering, and not even on purpose. He would just casually mention something like, well, one time when I brought a doggy bag from one of my favorite restaurants for lunch, he mentioned something about the owner doing something very, very bad to his wife, which I'm not going to mention any names because as I write this, there's an active investigation going on, but I think you can probably guess what I'm talking about if you know anything about the news of this area. I was able to set up a meeting with his parents once. I wasn't sure if I was going to say anything to him about his special ability, and I wasn't sure if they knew about it either, but that meeting was a bust. I didn't know how to ask or say anything that wouldn't sound completely insane, so I just wound up talking grades like any other boring teacher-parent meeting. Well, before I knew it, the school year was over. I tried to keep track of this kid, but his family moved over the summer. I don't know where he is now. And of course, I thought of so many questions I should have asked, but maybe this is for the best. In fact, and I know this is just a fantasy, but a kid like that, I wonder how long they can go without somebody noticing. Like somebody with a government agency or somebody with the military or, I don't know, maybe I watched too many movies in the 80s. Maybe he'll grow up and get a daytime TV show. Who knows? Well, he probably does. No matter what, Veer, if you're listening to this, thank you for showing me that the world is much, much bigger than I ever imagined, and please take care of yourself. You're a very, very special young man. Your friend always, Barbara. Wow, that's it. From Deming, New Mexico, as the Shock in the Dark tour of the United States continues and continues to lead me along my journey. Next week, we'll head to parts unknown and maybe to where you are. I don't have a Patreon. I don't charge anything. I do all this for free. Please support the channel and others like it. If you listen to it and it's free, just do something to support it. Push the like button, write a comment, subscribe, that sort of thing. Better yet, share the show with your friends and send me your true paranormal story. My email, AShockInTheDark@gmail.com. In the meantime, this is the narrator saying good night, wherever and whoever you are.